Good afternoon and welcome to the digital stage. We are here with Nick Wyness, and I am so excited to chat with you today. I have such an endless list of questions. I've been digging so deeply into you, but welcome to the conversation, Nick.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I was connected with you on LinkedIn through Hayden, who always points me to the most interesting people doing work in cultural organizations. And I have to tell you that specifically your content is relevant to me because I just spent the past 3 months doing a marketing strategy for a small maritime museum in rural Maryland. That's a good hour and a half drive from any major metropolitan areas, but they have this incredible niche audience of shipwrights who just love to learn about like the building of ships and all of that stuff. And so one of the things we talked about was building out Patreon and building out all kinds of different channels for their niche content. So my gosh, Nick, this content you have been doing for the Tank Museum is just endlessly fascinating, and I can't not wait to learn more about it. So my
Yeah,
first question is, tell me how this started. Like, you've been there for a while. When did this begin?
I have been there a while. I think it'd probably be helpful if I just kind of put a little bit of information out about the Tank Museum and
Yes,
what we
sorry.
do and where we are and how we got into all of this. So the Tank Museum is it is what it says it is. We're a military museum. It's military tanks, not fish tanks or petrol tanks. Other types of tanks are available, of course. But we are in a very rural area in the county of Dorset. It's about 2.5 hours, 3 hours away from London, and it's an hour away from the nearest town of Bournemouth. If it wasn't for the fact that Dorset as a county is where a lot of Brits go and spend their summer holidays, I don't think the museum would have survived at all. So it's very, very seasonal, or it has been in the past. August, when the school holidays are on, is always by far our busiest month. But yeah, we had this problem that we are, by a historical accident, really, in the middle of nowhere. The Tank Museum has been on the site. It is now for literally 100 years. We just celebrated our centenary last year. And the reason we're there is because in the First World War, when the tank was invented, the British government was looking for a place that was quiet and out of the way where they could test this new secret weapon and train the crews before they were sent over to France to fight. So quiet, out of the way location. That's where we found ourselves as the Tank Museum. So far from ideal, far from ideal.
Yeah.
So as you say, I've been at the Tank Museum for a long time now. It will be 20 years actually in July since I first walked through the doorway. Yeah, practically
Yeah.
my first sort of job as a grad. And so the Tank Museum's been on this really interesting journey of development in that time. You know, we've been redeveloping. We were fortunate enough to get a very large grant from something called the Heritage Lottery Fund, which in the UK this sort of almost kind of largely government-run grant-making body, which raises money through a lottery. So we got a very large sum of money to modernise the museum and start bringing it up to modern standards. So the visitor experience would be the exhibitions would be modernised and so on and so. And since then, of course, you know, we've had a responsibility to try and, you know, like all museums, we've got to get the word out. We've got to try and attract people to come, but we never had huge budgets. We never had huge sums of money. Advertising, as we all know, is very expensive, and the results can sometimes be rather. When social media, sort of, you know, about 10, 12 years ago, when brands started to really jump on social media, you know, I thought this was a great way to almost extend our PR activity online and help us reach and connect with people who would be interested in the kind of information and story we had to tell. So that's how it began. It was just about using content marketing to get out there to sort of reach new audiences who would be interested in the Tank Museum, and that hopefully we'd be able to drag them down to Dorset to get them to come.
So go ahead, Rowan.
We're both super excited, obviously. I mean, I'm really excited to hear about some of the specific things you're doing for a couple of reasons. First, we actually work. My team works with a World War II museum that has called Juno Beach Center that's based in France over there. Yeah, so beautiful, wonderful space to I was going to say celebrate. That's the wrong word. To commemorate the situation that happened there. And the other reason is a couple of years ago, I wrote an article specifically about museums, and as much as a museum, and in your case, you want to try to get as many people there as you can, there's the reality that a lot of people are never going to make it there. And the online social media, like social media posts that you're going to put up, or any kind of content or any kind of virtual exhibitions, are going to be the way that the majority of people interact with you. And, and so I'm excited to hear about the things you're doing and the effect that you've had with what you've been doing online.
I think, what you're saying there is absolutely right. And I think it was about 2017, we were spending, quite a lot of our marketing resource, if you like, on content marketing and sort of building these online communities and online audiences. And of course, the objective have always been about, we want to drag these people to the Tank Museum. But when we looked at the analytics, we were saying, well, actually, the vast majority of our, even based in the UK, let alone being within driving distance of the Tank Museum. So we had that moment of asking ourselves, well, what's the point here? What's the point? The biggest segment of our online audience is actually based in the USA, not Europe. So, it's very, although we'd love, of course, as many people to come over as possible, it's very unlikely in reality that those people would actually going to be able to practically come and visit the Tank Museum. And that's when our approach changed, really. That's when we realized that, maybe there is something in this. Maybe we can use this for, traditionally what museums would call fundraising activity. Maybe we could use that as a basis for advocacy and building support. And it might not just be about trying to get people.
Yeah,
I think definitely. I think Warren and I talked to a lot of museum folks, and I think it's a hard thing, well, especially when we work with performing arts centers, but it's a hard thing to get a lot of museums to understand. So when in the 2017s, you were doing traditional sort of content marketing. When did you switch to this sort of creator approach where you were really starting to produce a lot more content? I mean, what was the...
Yeah, that was basically it. It was basically at that time. It was sort of based around a conversation we were having with our board of trustees, and they were sort of saying, well, what's the point? What are we going to get out of this? What's the justification, if you like, for putting the time into this activity over this activity? And so, it was around the time there were, quite a lot of YouTubers, for example, were finding that they were able to sort of earn quite a decent amount of revenue. They were becoming self-supporting, in fact, from using the content they create to build audiences, and then basically, to use that kind of slightly crude term, monetizing those audiences. So it was simply a case of just kind of going to look at what some of those really big YouTubers were doing and taking those strategies off the shelf, just applying those to us as the Tank Museum, as the non-profit organization. And that's when we did things like launch the Patreon. That's when we actually started, we turned on the advertising revenue for our YouTube channel. That's when we started thinking about how we could monetize through partnerships and how we could sort of use that disparate remote audience to promote our e-commerce activity and sell merchandise in the same way that, for example, Mr. B sells t-shirts. Maybe we can sell Tank Museum t-shirts to people.
It's a thing I think a lot of organizations don't think about as much as they should, but the monetization of things that are outside the institution for certain. I'm curious what the team looked like. How did you build a team that was going to be able to do this? There's definitely a science to building videos that get that level of engagement. And I can't imagine you get access to top tier talent where you are. A lot of times with remote location comes a smaller employment pool.
Definitely. I think I have to say that the Tank Museum as a whole is a very entrepreneurial and very sort of, energetic organization, ambitious. And I think that is driven by the fact that, we don't get it handed to us on a plate. Where we are to work very hard for everyone that comes through the door. And, we're very proud of, what we've but we're very fortunate, very dedicated and talented people who come and work with us. So it starts slowly. So initially, when I go back to 2017, for example, the team was very small. It was just myself and a couple of other people. But as we started to show what was possible, we were kind of backed with more and more support and more resource. And now, of course, the team is much, much bigger. Of course, we're responsible not just for the online activity, but we're also, as I've already mentioned, responsible for making sure that the visitors are coming in, Monday to Sunday and coming to that kind of, we try and kind of, I wouldn't say that there's a team which is purely focused on the online activity. We all kind of dip in and do what we sort of need to do as just part of the overall, this is what we do as a museum. And of course, we've got a very large e-commerce site now as well. And of course, that's dealt with. Of course, we run the website and send the traffic to it, but of course, that's run effectively by our existing retail team, which of course had to grow considerably in order to cope with the demand as well. So, that's the other great news about this is that location, we've managed to create jobs at a time when a lot of museums have been struggling as well, particularly sort of since the pandemic. And we're also lucky as well in that we've got a local in Bournemouth, which is the nearest town. There is an arts university there as well, and they're sort of pumping out graduates every year with there's a film studies degree course there, and we've been very fortunate to grab a couple of graduates out of that institution as well.
That's a great way.
It's amazing, like hearing these stories. Like, I think it's not even a lesson for small museums. I think there's a lesson for any arts organization or any museum. Like what you're doing is unique, and a lot of people can learn from it. So I'm curious, how much of your revenues now as an organization are as a result of online efforts?
So last year it was almost 30%, and that's just the revenue that was generated online, people who weren't visitors. So, and that was through the advertising revenue, through the Patreon, through the membership sales, and through the brand sponsorship activity, and of course the e-commerce. And the e-commerce is, the biggest, certainly the largest in terms of turnover. But of course, things like the advertising revenue, the Patreon, that's all 100% profit, if you like, which goes directly into the charity, which ultimately improves the visitor experience. That's what we're doing this for, right?
And you've got close to 785,000 subscribers on YouTube, I was just looking at. I mean, that's astronomical. There's that many people interested in the topic.
It is. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. It really is. That's I think the power, to go back to where you started. You can take something which is niche. We don't get that many visitors in a year. We only get, last year was a record year for us. We had 200 visitors. And that, that's more than it used to be, for sure, which is fantastic. But we don't have that central metropolitan location. We're in no way comparable to those big, what we call national museums, for example. But it just shows that if with these niche interests, the internet is a fantastic tool to help you find, share that interest. And the internet is a big ocean.
So aside from YouTube, where do you find these communities? I mean, Reddit has to be on your list, right? Do you have team members who are sort of active in the chat communities?
We try and be. I mean, obviously, like I say, we don't have a massive team, so it can be a challenge to kind of keep on top of the things. And one of the things that I've always noticed, we've always wanted to do far more than we actually can do, if you know what I mean, because there's never the resource to do absolutely everything you want to, which is always quite sort of difficult to deal with. But we started our first media platform, which did really, really well for us, and still does really, really well for us, is Facebook, because Facebook is where most people are. We've branched off. We've got an Instagram now. Of course, we're on X, but X doesn't really do a great deal for us. It doesn't seem to allow people to engage as much as Facebook does, or as much as Instagram does. And just over a couple of years ago now, we launched a TikTok as well, and that's not doing too bad. We've got about 350,000 followers on TikTok. And what's interesting about TikTok as well, of course, it's a very, very different type of audience. So, of course, all of our online audiences have got one thing in common, and that's that they really like military history. They really like the story of armored warfare. But actually what we're seeing, and again, this is fantastic, is it's so much younger than our Facebook audience, and it's younger than our YouTube audience. And so, that for us is great to see that, it really is worth using different platforms in slightly different ways to achieve slightly different objectives in terms of bringing.
Have you also found that because of the change of platforms to TikTok, that the in-person the people that are visiting the museum now are skewing to a different age, or you find that it's still a similar kind of audience?
It's very difficult to say. So, going back to what I was saying earlier, and how I've always considered social media for us is a bit of an extension of our traditional PR activity. Like we'd write magazine articles and we send those off, kind of thing. These days we're writing our and we're putting it out there directly. So, like all PR, it's very, very, very difficult to measure. What you tend to see is change and trends. I mean, this is all about brand building. So it's slow and steady wins the race. For us, one of the key, completely unscientific ways that we know it's working and it is bringing people into the museum is, for example, the amount of autographs, the guy who presents our TikTok, the amount of autographs and selfies that our curator who appears in the use has to sign as well. So clear that the recognition is transferring to people who are coming through the doors, but it's very difficult to know whether or not it's a direct draw. I don't really sort of think of it like that myself. I do see the kind of the potential on-site audience, the potential online audience as being very, very difficult, very different.
I'm noticing on this YouTube channel you have members only content as well, which I think is a neat aspect. How do you decide what becomes publicly available and what's members only content?
So for the time being, at least, because of course you always have to review what you're doing because it depends very much on how the audience reacts. But what we do with the public content is, that's the storytelling. That's the stuff which anyone would like, regardless of what their relationship is with the Tank Museum, if they're into the subject matter. What we've been doing with the members only content is a little bit more different. It's a little bit more personal. So we have a monthly curators Q&A, which is where you can submit a question about anything tank related. I'll be our curator, and he'll go off and do a lot of research, very, very detailed answers.
Oh, I love that.
And the other thing that we're doing is sort of a monthly behind the scenes video as well, which is where we kind of sort of get different departments in the museum to basically give us a little bit of an update of their work. Whether that's in the tank workshop, whether that's in the exhibitions department, in our events team, whether it's in our own team, whatever's going on that we think our members would be interested in, we would tend to feature. And of course, these are all things that tend to relate directly, if you like, to the mission and the values of the Tank Museum, which is what those people's donations is actually supporting. So it's like how we go about doing our restoration work. How do we go about conserving our artifacts? How do we go about displaying them? How do we go about deciding what new exhibitions and displays?
What made you separate it out as a membership on YouTube specifically versus a membership perk as a, say, membership of the museum itself, where you've got membership gated content on the website?
So one of the things that I've been really keen to do is try and make sure that that wherever you have the membership, by and large, the benefits are broadly similar. So, of course, we've got a traditional Friends of the Tank Museum scheme. Trying to do really is just make sure that our Patreon and our YouTube memberships is very, very, very similar. But we've also created this this Friends members only website so that the Friends too, the traditional Friends, as it were, they can get access to this members only video as well. And I think in the future we'll certainly be investing far more in that. We still produce a magazine as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, what we've seen through all of this is that actually the circulation of that magazine is increased, because we're finding that people who join us, I don't know, like $5 a month Patreons, they also would like to subscribe to the magazine as well, which is costly. So that's another sort of touch point for us. It's very easy for us to send a magazine. It's very sort of inexpensive. And so yeah, we're just finding there's more and more demand, if you like, for this very specialized information that we're able to produce. We're very fortunate to have found this niche that we seem to be able to.
Yeah, it's Tank Talk, right? Is there a Tank Talk?
Yeah.
There is a Tank Talk, of course.
Of course,
Have
there
you not
is.
checked it?
No, but I keep getting. I have a 15-year-old daughter, so I get constantly made fun of for the various talks that I find myself deeply dug into. So I never know how I end up there, but here I am. So it's fun. So I'm curious, do you have any intentional pathways or like journeys that you try to craft, coming from a marketing perspective, between your subscribers across all your different channels and into the paid membership plot, the Friends of the Museum, that sort of a thing, where you can actually have a little bit more ownership over that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with all of this online activity, particularly since we kind of made the realization that actually it's not just about trying to get people to visit, although that is a big part of it. But all of this stuff, all of this connectivity, there needs to be some objective for it. So any Facebook post, for example, should have some kind of call to action in it, whether that call to action is to consume more content over here, or check out our website over here, or look at this event page, watch this video over here. And those pages themselves, for example, this page on our website might have opportunities to buy something from our online store, might have opportunities to buy a ticket for our big Tank Fest event, for example, which is our biggest fundraising event of the year. Or, and really significantly, something you can never you can never ask for enough of is gathering emails is really significant as well. So once we've got people's email addresses, of course, they go onto our sort of e-newsletter, and then we can talk to them about all of the interesting opportunities that might be suitable for them. And it's basically looking to get anyone who follows any of our channels just onto that next step, whatever that might be, whether that is just from us, just one time, that's absolutely fine. But we'd love them to become a member. We'd love them to become a patron. We'd love them to come and visit ultimately if it's possible. And some people, for example, will fly all the way from the US, from Australia for Tankfest, which is our big event at the end of June. About 25% of our audience.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, I imagine if you're a follower, then, and if you just happen to be within the 2.5 hour drive, you're going to make a little bit of an extra effort to try to get there. I mean, it's something that seems like there's not a lot of reason to visit places in a general sense. If you have that tie to the content and tie to the community, it feels
Absolutely.
important.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, the thing that I'm learning from you, and it's something that I think I've talked with Andy and I have talked about on other podcast episodes we did, is this idea that as soon as somebody has given you their email and says I'm a fan, you shouldn't be afraid to reach back out to them. In other words, if I want to develop that relationship, you don't have to be aggressive, but you shouldn't be restrained in what you're offering and what you're asking.
Absolutely right. And, my philosophy on this, a bit like it's the social media side of things, is that, we often, I'm sure, see brands kind of using social media as a sales channel. And we all know that's not what it's for. But for me, it's just about every opportunity we have to say something cool about tanks or our subject or something that we think is really interesting. We want to share it. That goes on social media, it goes in the emails. And, the hope is logically that will lead to an increased desire for engagement with us, an increased desire for more sense of affinity with us, and ultimately, if that leads to a donation, then happy days.
For sure.
If not, we're still doing our job as a charity.
And that's my exact point, is that the mission of so many of the organizations we work with is really to share that information, right? It's to protect and preserve the history. It's to share the history and the cultural relevance. And that doesn't just mean to the folks who are walking through the door. And so accessibility, inclusivity becomes such a big part of that message as well, and of sharing and expanding on that mission. I just think it's we're afforded such neat new channels that I wish so many more organizations were really just embracing that, and this having curatorial support in the content production system, whatever that looks like. I mean, all of that is so vital.
Absolutely. Cool. And I think, a lot of organizations struggle with this idea of getting the organization aligned to sort of create stuff which is as good as the stuff they have on site to go out online as well. And I think that was a journey for us, and it'll be a journey for other organizations who have yet to go through it. Believe even now, even today, we still have those occasional kind of debates sometimes about the idea that if we're giving away all this stuff for free, surely it must devalue the museum experience, right? Sure, if we give it away for free online, visit the Tank Museum, which is those sorts of mindsets still exist, surprisingly, even though.
Yeah, and having been publishing content as a marketing agency for the past 20 years, I can tell you that I can tell people how to do better email marketing, for instance, 1,000 times over, and they're still going to hire us to do it for them. So giving things away for free does not prevent people from wanting the actual in real life experience in whatever case that looks like. So
absolutely.
If nothing else, we're traveling to Italy this summer. I've seen 7 million photos of some of the places we're going. It makes me more excited to visit those places. I cannot wait to see them in person. So
absolutely,
building that engagement. So Nick, we work with a lot of small organizations and mid-sized organizations, but I'd love to hear what your advice would be to people who want to get sort of started with embracing this sort of creator economy. Where does this thinking, like what kinds of teams, what kinds of equipment, what kinds of tech and tools, what do you recommend?
So I think that the best advice I could give is, people are thinking about getting started, is just to get started, just do it, just get stuck in, experiment. Because what has worked for us might not work for other organizations. If you have we're, I suppose, fortunate in the sense that we do have this very, very niche and it is a very, very narrow sort of set of things that we can talk about, but it's also an international story, isn't it? We talk the great global conflicts of the 20th century. So I appreciate that a local history museum might not feel like they've got quite the same sort of stage, I suppose, that we have to talk about, but the tools, the techniques, they absolutely will apply, won't they? It's still about really good storytelling. It's still about using the artifacts and the objects that you will have in your collections, and the expertise of those curators and those experts, and sharing that online in a way which an audience will find easy to consume, in a way that they'll find original, and in a way that they'll just find useful because it's interesting. So it'll stop them scrolling through. So that's the objective, isn't it? Is to stop people scrolling and pay attention to what you're putting out there. So I definitely think just getting started, I think you do need to be quite curious yourself, curious about the audience, about what their expectations might be, because even if you do have a slightly broader subject area, you still need to sort of figure out what that audience might look like, and therefore what they might like, and then you've got to experiment with it and they react to it and see what you need to do to adapt it. I think it's always useful to have, as a marketer, it's always useful to have allies on that curator side as well, who can kind of help you out, because the other thing that's really important if you're representing a museum is you really can't afford to get the facts wrong, can you?
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. It speaks, though, to, I had done some research maybe a year and a half ago about the fact that above all other media outlets, museums are trusted more than any other museum outlets. And then I'm watching as so many museums become media companies and they become publishers. And it's just there's so much opportunity and so much space to sort of lead conversations around, international, whatever these things are, to lead these conversations because of that inherent trust and credibility that come with being, having been there. So that's cool.
I definitely think that's part of why we've been able to build these online audiences as well. Because with that word museum, that sort of status that we have as an accredited museum, as a not-for-profit organization, it means that people perhaps feel that we're trusted. We're they can believe, I suppose, what we're saying in an age with, so much misinformation out there, and particularly on social media, whereas that trust can lead to commitment. That commitment is what ultimately leads you to build a community, and that community is that's the basis for advocacy and support. So I think museums have got it absolutely made, because not only do we have that kind of inherent trust in these potential communities, but we've got the best stories. We've got stories that other brands would literally die for.
Yeah, like brands have to make up stories. You actually are sitting on a vast treasure trove of stories. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so funny. I'm like, harken back to the Squatty Potty, the unicorn pooping, like rainbow poop. And I'm thinking, these made up stories are they can, every now and then there's some gem, for the most part. You're like, yeah, okay. That's so true. The stories are just endless. I agree with that. So, Warren, do you have any other questions?
No, I just want to say, Nick, thank you for doing this with us. I mean, I've come back to the point that I started off with our discussion with, which is, there's a lot of people who may never make it to your museum in person, but what you're doing is actually connecting with people who are getting to understand things that in ways that they might not otherwise. And I think it's great that you're doing that.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. I've been watching all of your content across all the different, going out and speaking, I think, is really helpful too, because I think small museums often feel stuck with what they can do from a marketing perspective. And they have such a hard time with even the basics and the foundation of marketing, that it's like, okay, I can hardly get my weekly email newsletter out. How do you expect me to go and create all these videos and things like that? But finding student help and internships, there's so many opportunities that from low budget all the way up. So, and
Absolutely.
Technology has made it so much more accessible.
Just got to, I think it's, you can't expect, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it's just that idea of, when you don't have the resources, you just have to sort of like step.
I do have questions about brand partnerships, but I'm going to save that for another conversation because we're at time. But I really appreciate you being here with us, Nick. I have so many interesting thoughts around what you guys are doing, and I'll be a fan forever. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.